Hey everybody, welcome to Olivia's Book Club. I'm still Olivia Fierro, so I'm still your host of this book club podcast. Thanks so much for listening to this and taking a break maybe from your reading. I am currently talking about reading right now, excited to do so as always after a morning of reading and talking, but books are a lot more interesting than teleprompter scripts during the morning newscast. So really excited, especially to share this one with you. There's a lot to dive into today. We'll have some book recommendations with a moment with Margaret a little bit later on, but now I want to introduce you to our guest, best-selling author of The Silent Girls, Lie in Wait and Reap. Eric Rickstad is on the podcast to discuss his October release, I Am Not Who You Think I Am. And let me just tell you, when I first started listening to this on audio on NetGalley, I did not know what to expect, and I went, oh my bleep. I was completely hooked right away. So, Eric, I'm so excited to talk to you about this. This was, to me, a really surprising, fantastic, incredibly well-written story that just took me on quite a ride, and I never knew what was going to happen next.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. This is great. Who doesn't love to talk about books?
Especially a great one that you have to share.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a real pleasure to come into a book without a lot of expectations. And so I just really, it popped out to me on NetGalley and I started listening to it and I was driving and I'm like, what is happening right now? Wow. So please give, for our listeners, the pitch for the book. What is this about? How do we explain it?
Yes. Well, it's a dark Gothic thriller, as you know. And it's about a young boy. He comes home early from school one day in the 70s, when they would send you home on your own and when you weren't feeling well. And he comes in and he finds his father in the midst of sitting on the bed about to shoot himself. And his father does do that. And the young boy is traumatized. He finds a note that says, I am not who you think I am. And he hides it because he's traumatized and he's afraid. But he's soon going to have a lot more to be afraid about. His mother rids the house of everything that exists that even begins to suggest his father ever lived there or existed, which was strange for him. And a few years later, something happens where he has this epiphany of this sort of physical evidence that I don't know if that was even my father that day. He had his back turned to me, and this thing that happens just convinces him that it could not have been his father. And if it wasn't, then who was it? And if it wasn't, then where is his father? And the note he suspected was written by his father, I am not who you think I am. Then who wrote it? Did his father read it to this person that was in his parents' bedroom, or what happened? So he begins to investigate with the help of a girl he's sort of smitten with and his only friend. And he goes down a rabbit hole of deceit and town lore and history and begins to go deeper and deeper into a world of confusion and lies.
It's so beautifully written and it's so complex. I mean, there are so many layers to this story, and it is really powerful to think about this one small little note. Obviously, it's the most traumatic moment in Waylon's life, or anybody's life, of course, as it would be, but this note that's left behind and just the so few words, the title of the book, I Am Not Who You Think I Am, the many endless directions that the mind could go as to what that means, what message that was, who the message was for, who the message is really from. I mean, on and on. It's limitless possibilities, and your heart just breaks for this young kid who had to experience this and was really clutching at anything to kind of give him sort of a hold in reality or have some sense of purpose. I mean, he is just lost. It's sort of so sad how his life kind of is playing out and just drifting along without real much connection and care from those years past, as we're seeing him now through the eyes of a teenager.
Yeah. And it is a sad story for him in a lot of ways. And it's, really it's at the core, it is a thriller, and there's, the people have said, a jaw-dropping ending and all of those great things that a thriller provides. But it really is, for me, it was about this boy who wants to undo this traumatic moment at all costs. He's obsessed with, once this piece of evidence triggers his idea that maybe it wasn't my father. He's a boy who wants his father back. He's a boy who misses his father and whose life is irrevocably changed. And so he's convinced somehow he might still be out there. And so it's really about, the tragedy of this boy trying to find his way through this mystery and trying to end up to a place where he'd much rather end up. But in some ways, of course, are we better off knowing the truth that we might not be able to live with, or are we better off living with lies that make life a little more palatable? So, but I felt for him as I was writing it, for sure.
In the layers of mystery, because there's questions that he has within his own family, in his most intimate circle, and starts to stop trusting. And really, he has kind of lost his mom in many ways through the course of this, when he lost his father, in a variety of ways. And then these looming mysteries and mystique of the powerful family in town, and the dynamics of a town that is sort of shaped by, being hovered over the presence of the ones who control the money and seem to have limitless or almost mysterious influence over the entire town. As you were first sitting down, I mean, what was the kernel of the story? Where did it begin? Was it Wayland? Was it the suicide? Was it the note? Where did this story begin?
So it began, I had the beginning with the suicide. I had a friend who experienced something similarly traumatic, and it led to sort of his own life of upheaval. And no one knew about that when we were younger until later he experienced something and made us all wonder what had happened. And when we learned that, it made sense. So I had that. I always wanted to write a little bit about what happens to a young life that's in one way or another, experiences such upheaval. And then when I was a kid, I lived in Vermont, sort of across from an estate very much like this one. I knew the people, and they're great people and everything, but the setting on the lake with the big cliffs and the mansions and all of that lent a great deal of mystery, and intrigue as a young kid, even who was writing stories back then. And I always knew I wanted to do something with those mansions. And then one night, a barn and a house burned to the ground on the estate. And we lived close enough where my sisters and I could go out with my mom out, in our pajamas and sort of watch this very dramatic thing happen. So I knew that was the ending. And I knew I had the beginning of this traumatic experience happens with this kid. And then this mansion burning in a night of, madness and murder. That was the result. And somehow they were connected. And so I had it was a challenge, but a lot of fun to figure out, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to lead from one of this event to the final event of this mansion burning down?
Wow, that I just love to hear how these stories evolve, the ones that are so compelling, because I could not stop with this book. And you mentioned the beginning, and I want to talk about how the unique way that you start this book off. How did you come up with that concept? And I thought it felt so original and so, okay, wait, what is happening? And I have to know more.
Yeah. So that's, the setup is sort of the first thing you read as a reader is a note from local police, chief of police of this town of Shyburn, Vermont, where this all takes place, but it's present day. Mm-hmm. And it says, basically, it's an address to the town. We received this manuscript from this 50-year-old man who claims he was this boy back when this mansion burned down and was supposed to have disappeared or died that night. And this is basically a manuscript that we vetted and looked into that is going to set the record straight about what happened on this infamous night of the Inferno of 1984, where the mansion burned and people died. And you all have it wrong. And this man now was the boy then, Wayland, and he's writing this to the town to sort of set the record straight. and I knew I didn't want to write the novel with sort of as the younger voice writing it, at the time in the 80s. I knew I wanted to write as an adult looking back. And somehow it was one of those things where, as a writer, a lot of the writing and the best parts, for me anyway, take place with my subconscious is working. And I'm not actually sitting down writing. And I'm not sure where it popped in that, this needs to be a letter from the police. I might have been mowing the lawn or hiking, but it just came to me, and it sort of set a really dramatic and mysterious tone. I felt that would grip the reader and set it up in a different way than other books I've read or read a lot. And there's a lot of books I like, but I'm always trying to do things other people aren't doing.
Yeah. Oh, job well done. And it also, it gives gravity to the journey we're about to go on, because it's relevant enough for the police to address it to the community. And there's that point of recognition that, this community is going to know exactly what we're talking about, and this will be the buzz of the town. So it sort of sets us up to be all the more invested in where we're going. So I really loved that. I thought it was just incredibly clever and a fantastic way to start the book. I also enjoyed, and I have noticed lately, and it feels like a few of the authors we've had the pleasure to interview lately have been books set in the 80s or the 90s, and there's something appealing about that from a reader perspective, but I imagine from a storytelling perspective too, when you remove some of the conveniences of modern day life. I mean, things could be solved a lot more quickly for Wayland, I'm sure, if he could just Google everything.
Right. That's true. I think some of it probably could. And, there's a lot set in libraries. He's a boy who's sort of lonely and finds retreat in the library and books, and as a reader and as a writer, I love reading about, reading books that are about and involve libraries and books like Shadow of the Wind by Zafon and a bunch of others. And for him to be set, then it lends more mystery and intrigue to it. It certainly does. And that he has to go down sort of in the basement of the library or this back room of the library to look through old microfilm to try to figure out what's going on, or go through actual files at the town clerk and interact with these clerks who are adults and they're much older than him, and they kind of give him a suspicious eye, and I try to write even them with a sense of suspicion, like maybe they know more about what happened to his father. So it begins to feel through these interactions rather than I'll sit down and Google it.
Yeah.
He's got to go through these gates, of the librarian. Where can you bring me to these records? And well, what do you want these records for? And it was a lot of fun too to write back then.
Yeah, he's got to constantly defend what it is he's looking into.
I'm working on a report.
Yeah.
He forgets what report.
A different report than last time. Yeah, I don't remember.
And then keep track of his own lies.
Yeah, the element of not knowing who to trust and who has to keep things close to the vest, but then he finally has something interesting to share with people. And so I also... I love that the focus of the book and the main storytelling is Wayland as a teenager, because also what's compelling about this book is, in essence, it's a very difficult but coming of age story about a boy who's very awkward with people in some ways, but it is also has depth and enjoys poetry and has some sort of like romanticized ideals, but it's his interactions with the friend and with the girl Clay and with Juliet, and having a crush and the complexity of those feelings stirred up on top of what he's going through.
Right. Yeah. It becomes a real pressure cooker for him. Dealing with one of those things is enough for a teenager, right? A friend who's maybe more athletic than him and has an easier way with dating girls, and then this girl he's smitten with, and then the three of them together. That's always a setup for drama and angst and possible fallout. And then of course what he's investigating and what they're investigating together is traumatic. So it escalates everything, and everything has much more at stake, you know, especially when they're trying to maybe protect him a little bit and not necessarily agreeing with everything he's saying. And he takes that as an affront. Well, are you with me, or I'll do this on my own then? Or he questions every little thing movie makes with this teenage girl that, you know, if she's late seeing him, he takes on, it gives it so much more weight of something he did wrong than just, you know, the facts that, you know, she was late for X reason that makes perfect sense. So everything becomes so much, you know, encased in suspicion and paranoia, and who he can trust and who he can't, or who he believes he can trust and can't.
And just that insecurity of that time in your life when you are unsure of reading people's dynamics and you don't know how to navigate those, you know, I mean, the kind of shifting power dynamics and the desire and the potential rejection and the fear and all of that. And I think maybe because I in particular read so much women's fiction, and I'm usually in the mind of a female narrator and character, that it was really kind of exciting to observe, especially these two dudes working out this kind of like flexing macho dynamic and trying to figure out what their boundaries were in terms of how to create a friendship.
Yeah. And that's, you know, Waylon's not like that at all. He's the atypical modern American boy. And I really wanted to write that there's a lot of young boys out there who don't fit that at all, you know, and who always feel that they're always pushing against it and being pushed back. You know, his friend does simple things that he doesn't mean to be hurtful, you know, but just punching him in the shoulder over and over again when he's much smaller than his bigger friend. And it genuinely hurts physically, like, you know, stop doing that. And you know, that creates much greater complications later on in the novel. So, and I wanted to write a lot about that and a lot about how boys grow up and what is, you know, bullying and what isn't, even if it's from a friend, what goes beyond sort of teasing. And then also how Clay has a difficult time himself. You get one when they're first introduced on the roof of his house, basking in the sun, and then his father comes out. You understand Clay's life is on the edge too, and that he suddenly turned from that macho kid to, you know, a kid that's on the defense and very much vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that macho stuff is just a mask. You know, a lot of it's not knowing what else to do, how else to perform, how else to communicate with another boy your age and not come off as, you know, weak or this or that.
Yeah, that was really, those interactions were just great for me to observe, because it's just like another world, and it enhanced this book that is, I mean, really a mystery, but it was there was so much to it, so it was so enjoyable. Now I know that you are in Vermont, and you mentioned hiking and spending time outdoors and where various ideas come to you. I love to know about what is your writing process when you're really sitting down to write and you're starting with this. Where are you? What are you doing? What's the pattern? Are you isolated? Are you eating? Are you?
When I'm inside, I try to stick close to the refrigerator. But most of the time I write the first draft of a novel longhand in a notebook with a pencil. Oh. So I've got boxes and boxes going back years of notebooks, all kinds of notes, cheap spiral bound notebooks to nice, really leather bound ones. But I always use a pencil. I really like the physicality of it. I like how tactile it is, and being able to scratch out, you know, rereading something. Oh, that's terrible. You know, and instead of click delete, I get to, you know, really scratch it out and move arrows, and I can be outside, you know, I can be out in the woods. I can be out on my patio or the front porch or along a stream or wherever I want. And with this one, a lot of the Gothic element, I live 10 minutes from where Shirley Jackson lived and wrote her books, The Haunting of Hill House and The Lottery, and where Donna Tartt wrote The Secret History. And out my kitchen window, I can actually see Glastonbury Mountain, which Shirley Jackson based her second novel on. very gothic novel based on a girl that disappeared in this mountain. And then Donna Tartt got a lot of influence from that mountain as well. I think it's probably Mount Cataract, where Bunny's killed in The Secret History. But I would go down to North Bennington nearby and go by their houses and like where they, and sit and write, in a shop that's still coffee shop market that's still there where Shirley Jackson was inspired by the lottery to write the lottery. So I'll do that. And I don't usually outline anything.
Wow.
It's always been a real strong image or two that I trust is worth a novel, like The Mansion Burning, or like this traumatic experience for Waylon. And then I just start writing, and it becomes like I'm a witness, like I'm just there, and I don't know what's going to be behind the door when they open it. There's just for one of 1,000 examples, he goes to this cabin in a swamp looking for someone. I didn't even know if when he opened it was going to be who he was seeking or not, or I didn't know he was going to find a note when this happens to his father, when he witnesses. And then all of a sudden he looked down and there's a note. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, I wonder what it says.
You're kidding me. And the note is like such
and
that
he turns over the note and it says, I am not who you think I am. And I'm like, oh boy. I mean, this is going to be a fun one to write. Like, what does that mean? So I had to figure it out, but my subconscious knew. In some way, it always knows, that all of these little things are going to connect. And so I'm with him. I don't know where he's going to find, a sample of his father's handwriting, since nothing is left in the house. I don't know, what he's going to find in the town records, things about his father's barbershop. I didn't know until he opens the file. And I didn't know Juliet was going to be standing behind him in the library to meet him the first. I knew they would meet, and I knew Clay, I knew certain things. And as I go along, more and more gets filled in ahead of time. I understand, this has to happen and this has to happen. But
wow,
that's part of my process, which is a little different for most people.
it's like you come out of a fever or something, and then now there's just a book, and you're like, where did this go?
I have no idea how I wrote.
That is so wild. Oh, at what point? And I just for some reason, because the descriptions of the dog and their bond and the smells and the basement time and I learned things about. All my dogs have been boys, so I learned much about having a female dog. Also in this, when did she come into play? Because that connection is very important, and also what's such a mess about her kind of, I guess, really reflects his whole life.
Yeah, and it was when he was thinking about Juliet and how she had a dog, and it occurred to me he has a dog too, but it's such a different dynamic, and part of it is informed by them living on the brink of poverty, and his mother loves him so much, and he loves his mother, but she has to work 2 jobs constantly to maintain just some financial stability, that she can't be there necessarily physically that much, or emotionally, as much as she tries to spend 1 day a week with him. And this dog, all of a sudden, there was this dog, Molly, and she was down in the basement, and I really wanted him to bond with that dog, and for the reader to show that this kid has a lot of feelings, like he really cares about, his sister and his mom and this dog, and he's aware of where he's at. There's a couple lines about, he realizes, that his life is so different from all of his friends. And he wants it to be normal. And there's no way to, even if he just never even decided to go forward with looking into the mystery, that it's going to be a hard row to hoe to find that normalcy. And so I really wanted his heart to be in this book, and the dog helped with that, I think.
Oh, it's there. He's such a complex character, and you really feel for him, and he's been dealt just such a traumatic hand. and then so much else along the way. So it was very, very gripping. Obviously, you've referenced books that have inspired you and incredible works that you read, and you're an avid reader. When do you recall first falling in love with books? That's what I always wonder when we speak to authors. When did it go, bling, wow, that's something really special to pick up a book?
Yeah, I was really pretty young. I mean, it was, right when I started to read. I read kind of early. I was reading some like in kindergarten and first grade. And I just was entranced going to the school library, or, the library where I went to grade school, and walking, like this row of books and being like, how can I ever read all these? Like, and then, so it was really early on. It was probably second or third grade where I would read a book. I'd read Encyclopedia Brown, or I'd read, some Judy Blume book, or just, a nonfiction book about, animals that are on the brink of extinction, or whatever it might be. And I remember very distinctly reading something and being done with it, and whether it was filled me with joy or excitement or dread or some other really dramatic feeling, thinking, how did they do that? How did someone just line up a bunch of words and make me feel this way? And I thought, boy, I want to do that, because that's pretty cool. That's like some magic trick. And then, you continue to have influences up to this very day. There'll be a new influence, but that was when it was very early. I was in a literary lunch with the principal of the school and the librarian in fourth or fifth grade, where once a week we'd meet and have a book club. And it was me and like 8 girls. and we discussed, like, seriously, about, we'd write a 1-page report and stuff. And I just loved it. And I always wanted to do it.
Oh, well, you are doing it, and you are creating the magic and inspiring other people. And I mean, we're sitting down with books like this and going, how do they do it? So what an absolute pleasure to consume this, and also to be able to bounce back and forth and have the good fortune of holding this beautiful book. The cover is amazing, and also to see and the changes in the type because of the notes and all of that. There is so much to having this book in your hand, but then also Steven Weber with the narration is he's fantastic, out of this world.
Yeah.
Eric Rickstad, thank you so much. The new book is I Am Not Who You Think I Am. It is a fantastic novel. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
So good to talk to you. Thank you. All right, Margaret. So I Am Not Who You Think I Am. Eric Rickstad, you're reading it. Mm-hmm. Wasn't he wonderful?
Oh my gosh. I loved hearing his writing process. It is very different from the other authors we've talked to. And,
Pencil, hello.
It's funny because I was thinking about this. We do editorial meetings, and a lot of our producers and executive producers, they're writing down all of the story pitches in the morning and who's going to do what. And I've noticed a lot of them, I use pen, very permanent in that way, and they're all using pencil. And I said, why? Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, we like the, erasing and changing. Yeah. And so when he was talking about that, I was like, I can totally understand that. I can understand the physicality of changing your book versus, typing it out, backspacing. And then it feels like you've done more accomplishment, more work, I think. And it's so interesting.
And if you're a nature-y guy, or like what he's saying about just being in the different environments where you're absorbing where great things were also inspired, you get to be on the go, and you get to be influenced by or change your mood, or what it's like to change your scenery. It's
absolutely.
A huge difference.
Yeah, you just jot things down while you're sitting on a rock next to a stream and
Of course you should.
Yeah.
And I just also want to acknowledge, oh my gosh, he mentioned Secret History, Donna Tartt, and I read that book so it came out in 2004. I just looked it up because I was like, how could it be so long? This book was like a game changer for me, and I want to say it was maybe the book as an adult that got me back into reading regularly when I had been lapsing and been just all TV and movies all the time. And it came out in 2004. If you have not read it, it is just like a literary phenomenon. It'll blow your mind crazy. And it was my friend loaned it to me. And then I told you when my husband and I were first dating, I loaned it to him. And it was a secret test.
A secret history, secret test.
It was a test.
Lots of secrets.
To see if he could get into this book and if he would appreciate it in the same way I did. And he did, and we had this really great conversation about it.
Passed
and I was
the
like,
test.
oh, he's smart. I like this
Well,
guy.
you are married to him now, so.
But it's been long enough. I think I need to actually reread it because it's that good. So put it on your list if you haven't.
You probably also, you know what? You guys have been married for some time now. It's another book test.
Yes, exactly.
What's the next book we're going to test him with? Oh, we said we were going to try and get him to do Home Before Dark.
Oh, that's a no-go.
Come on.
That is a no-go. But he is currently reading When the Stars Go Dark, Paula McLean.
Oh.
And so he usually stays far away from anything that is a detective, especially if it's a missing person or a sex crime or something like that. It's too close to home. And he's really digging it, though. And he actually then had follow-up questions for me. And I'm like, well, I already interviewed her, so I can't ask that. But he wanted to know more about, like, who she consulted with, because he feels like, especially at that time period, the investigative process for the main character, it was really spot on.
Well, did you tell him when he's finished he can have a cocktail and a meal that is in conjunction with that book?
Oh, yeah.
You should bribe him with that.
That's a good idea.
Right?
That's a good date night.
Well, now that you've finished this book, we can now have the cocktail and the meal.
I'll let you cook me a nice dinner. Here's the recipe.
It wasn't oysters. It was mussels.
Yes, spicy mussels and some kind
of.
But
you can't eat the mussels.
Well, we can change it. I can do regular fish.
Yeah.
So this book, of course, Wayland in his teen years is really the guy that we're locking in on and seeing the world from, reflecting on what happened to him before and what's going to happen next. And so you're thinking also about some books from this sort of perspective.
Yes. So I read a book called The Chalk Man by Cj Tudor. I've talked about Cj Tudor before with the Burning Girls. But The Chalk Man, The Chalk Man is actually about a group of teen boys in the 80s who they have this, they each have their own colored chalk, and they draw these little stick figures in front of each other's houses, and the colors mean different things. Like, this is not probably accurate, but like green means like meet me at the park, and white means come to so-and-so's house or whatever. So they each have their own color. And then at some point, somebody else is drawing these figures and trying to like coax them somewhere.
Oh.
Somebody's caught on to their code. And what happens is it leads them to a dismembered body. And they're all trying to figure out who this person is, how they got there. And it doesn't get figured out in that time. And so you're hearing it from the perspective of an adult now.
Oh, remembering when this was going on.
And he's remembering and trying to go back and think what actually happened in that time.
Wow.
So it's very similar. Very similar, but like instead of it being an 8-year-old to a teenager, it's teenager to adult. And there is a teacher that is also in play. There's a teacher in play here that, he goes back to try and get some answers. And there's also a beloved teacher or someone he kind of stands out as being weird, or they're not quite sure about who he is as a person. He is kind of a big part of this teen's life in some perspective. And so it's just him as an adult trying to go back and figure out what's happening. So it's very similar. That was the first Cj Tudor book that I read, and I really liked it. And so that's why I read The Burning Girls. So The Chalk Man, it's very interesting, and who it ends up, and there's some bullying in there too. So, it's all the things that you think. It's like a quintessential like 80s, teenage, you know what I mean, angstiness. And it reminded me a lot of like Stranger Things, It, all those like 80s teenage issues, or young preteens having issues with each other.
And I think it's clever, and one of the things that this book does as well, and is giving you the perspective of one person, your protagonist, your narrator, who's having things happen to them and trying to figure out what's going on and who's doing what, but from reflecting from their young eyes, how they remember things, then the teen. And then as he, and I'm not spoiling anything because he referred to it at the beginning, the way that the story is presented is him telling the tale as an adult.
Right.
And so then with the maturity and the perspective of being able to look back on all of the events that happened in their totality, I just think it's a really smart way to dive into a human being because they're so different in these different stages.
Totally.
And so I really like that. It's like they've really crafted a full life experience.
Yeah. And I think he did such a great job of really putting you in these scenes. You guys talked about the poor dog in the basement and just the very detailed, it really puts you there. Like I can see their like kind of shambly house. He did mention going out into the swamp talking to somebody and who was in that cabin. You could picture the swamp. You can picture that cabin and the person that answered the door. You can picture the library and the different places he ends up going. You can picture all those things. And I think he did such an incredible job with that.
Yeah, and he mentioned just sort of the underlying theme of this is a family on the brink of poverty. And that is that sort of shame that is carried with Wayland because he knows that his clothes look a mess. He knows he stinks from the night before. He knows it's embarrassing to bring somebody into his home.
Yeah.
He wished he could do more for his dog. I mean, all of those things and how that kind of also shapes somebody and keeps them maybe apart from others when they need to be going forward toward people. But then at the same time, he's a very deep person who loves poetry and really sees things with, through a very sweet sensibility. So I think that, as we always say, like, reading about people who are unlike yourself in another part of the country, from another background, whatever, it gives you that empathy. And it just is there's so much more.
Absolutely. And I actually, because I'm not finished with this book, I just got to a point where there's something, he's washing his shirt and he got something on it. And his mom's like, this shirt has something on it. And he said, oh, it's okay. It's not a great shirt anyway. And she said, you have to make it last. And she also bought him a nice, what she thought was his favorite meal. And it ended up not being his favorite meal anymore based on time. But while it maybe somebody necessarily wouldn't find that to be a real fancy meal, to them it was important.
It meant something.
And I can kind of relate to that. Like, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and it came to those things where, and I'm a kid from the 80s and 90s, like we ate a lot of canned vegetables, like that was our thing. So I can understand, some of these like, hey, they have to last, or this is what's considered a fancy meal to you, but to like your friends, they wouldn't necessarily be. And so seeing that difference between him and Juliet and him just being so scared of like letting her into his house.
So intimidating.
Very intimidating. And like, he thinks the just the comparisons between the dogs. Even that was like, you understand.
Yeah, it's really good writing.
Yes.
I mean, it's really good writing. And I think also a lot of books we read, and I love this. I mean, I love to read about these people in these like rich enclaves and these these lifestyles or whatever. That's we see that a lot in plots, and it's there's a lot of dynamics that are enticing, and lend themselves to drama in that scenario as well. But something fundamentally here is sort of the loneliness of a young person who's being raised by a single parent, because that single parent, just to parent them, meaning keeping them alive, they've got to work their rears off,
two jobs,
24/7 essentially. And then you're absent.
Yeah.
And so, oftentimes parental absence is more of a theme of the selfish parent or the parent that's got this going on or, whatever, doesn't care. This is just reality for so many households. And you want to be there, but you can't. And then what happens to your relationships because you can't?
Absolutely.
And so I thought it had a lot of depth and is a really enjoyable book. So I am not
Loved it.
who you think I am, Eric Rickstad. And then tell me this is
The Chalk Man
The Chalk Man
by Cj Tudor.
Love it.
Really good.
Thank you, Margaret.
Of course.
So many books, so little time. A Moment with Margaret. Get back to reading. Let us know what you're reading. Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.